another day here in the city of Durham, North Carolina, and we're going to see what's happening in the world. Of course, I've got that video that I promised folks that I was going to show on it yesterday, and I'll bring that up in a matter of a minute or so in that way. But right now, we're going to find out what kind of important things are happening in the world. We do have one of our guests that is always bringing us interesting things around the medical community and all in that kind of ideas and things in that space. I know Shaquille told me not to use that phrase, but I use it anyway because that just going to give him a little bit of a chuckle and all in that way and everything that goes on in that kind of conversation. But seriously, there is all kinds of things that are happening in the world, including the U.S. being set to hit the debt ceiling. That is prompting the Treasury to take extraordinary measures. We're going to find out what some of these extraordinary measures are, and definitely folks will be interested in seeing what that is and what is going to be happening in that way. But New York Governor Hochul has picked his top judge, and apparently that top judge has been rejected by the Senate panel. So we've got things happening in the Senate as well, and we've got a number of other things that are going on in the world, and we're going to be finding out what's happening and what people are thinking. And a Texas prisoner is continuing his hunger strike in protest against solitary confinement. And speaking of prisoners, I did hear earlier today, because I was looking at the news online, that El Chapo, that Mexican drug cartel head, is actually complaining about his prison confinement and saying that he's not getting enough sunlight. So he sent a letter to the Mexican president to see what they can do while he is serving all of this time for his involvement in the drug culture. And like I said, when I found that article, I'm going like, so wait a minute, you've done all of this stuff in the drug world, and now you're going to complain because you're not getting enough sunlight. And apparently he put it out to his lawyers, and now his lawyers are going to apparently help him with the Mexican consult and a number of other folks that might help him. Maybe they're going to jump on board, but all in this space. But, he is a major individual in the crime world. I mean, I've even seen that name featured on some television shows and things in that way. But it'll be interesting to see whether folks are actually going to pay attention to his complaints and if they're just going to ignore them, as I'm thinking they probably are. But who knows? There may be some folks that are going to jump on board and be trying to find a way to get him out, even though he is serving a very long sentence, from my understanding, for his involvement in various parts of the drug culture that exists in that way. But we're going to see if that happens or what happens in this whole notion. And we've also got some interesting things going on with the news of violence, because apparently the fine folks in Atlanta, protesters, are calling for violence against the police after shooting leaves one dead and an officer injured. So that is definitely where there is some tensions going on down there. I'm actually going to have to check with my cousin who's down that way, because he is a GBI officer, and I definitely know that I want him to be safe, but I want any of the officers to be safe down that way in Atlanta, and it'll be interesting to see. So maybe I'll reach out to Jonathan Spurlock and see if he's got any comments or any thoughts about what's going on in that part of the world, since he is a family member that is in that part of the world. So maybe I'll bring him on next week. His brother was on because he was involved in the military, and now he is between the whole, I think he's in the Atlanta area as well. So I'll check with both of them and see how things are going. But there was a whole thing around the efforts to stop training centers and protect the forest. So there's all kinds of things that were going on in that particular story, but we're going to find out more about it. I'm sure that some of my other people may have some other comments on this particular story and see what they've got to say about that. And last but not least, and like I said, I did that very much on the fly, but we're going to bring up a video. Well, first I'm going to bring up my guest, Dan Worthington, who is joining us from the fine state of Utah. Lee Newton Rhodes is joining us from the fine state of New York. And I've got Alan Lindemann, the doctor, and all. I'm trying to remember where Alan's hometown is, but I'm sure he will tell me in the course of the...
South Dakota. North Dakota.
North Dakota, in the course of our conversations, and see what goes on. But one of the things I want to actually bring up...
I do actually also want to make mention that this morning, Australian time or New Zealand time, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, resigned It took about 15 seconds for me to, between the time that I saw the announcement and for my centre-right and right-wing friends to start sending me memes about it. So that was, I thought that was pretty good timing there. They did well, 15 seconds. I thought that was a pretty good job.
And speaking of memes,
I think we'll talk about her resignation. We'll talk about, I think, the state of politics around the world in relation to the responses from the public with their governing leaders. And this is something that's affected centre-right parties. It's affected centre-left parties. I think it'll be an interesting conversation for today.
No doubt. And speaking of memes and all of that, well, as we ended yesterday's show, I mentioned that I had found somewhat of a meme conversation or a TikTok that involved Biden at a historically African-American church. And a lot of folks, when they were watching the video, were saying that he was looking a little bit out of place, looking like he might not even know the words and not know a number of other things. And we're just feeling like he was a lot lost in some of the conversations.
Mark?
That word.
I think the exact quote was he was getting stiff in Pastor Warnock's church. Isn't that what we said?
He didn't come in blackface?
He did not come in blackface, but a lot of people were wondering about the whole notion of him being there and whether it was a rescue mission or whatever was going on. But let's watch the video, and then y'all can tell me what you think, because I can tell you the comments on TikTok were quite hilarious.
This guy is clueless.
So there's all kinds of.
Well, I think
It looks like he's never been in a church before.
No, I think to be fair, there's nothing really unusual about that. It's just an old white guy in a black church. I mean, they've got no idea. I love going to black church.
You're being polite. Anybody with a half a brain can get the hint. Maybe I should clap.
No, he's not going to get the hint. But seriously, I've had the great pleasure of going through many black churches in the South, and look, I love it. But I see white people that go there regularly that sort of sit there like, oh, okay. And I think it says a lot for white people. Really, it's the only time, Mark, that I'm going to pick on white people. Have you ever been to a white church? And you see the black church, they've come from slavery and oppression and all these terrible things that have happened, and they're up there singing, hallelujah, rejoice for the Lord. You go to a white church and they're like, hallelujah. I mean, it's just these people have had a dream run. Apparently, this is the history we're being taught, and seeing them sing at a church. No, I think the black church is.
Shaquille, that may be true, but did nobody say? Guess what? When you go there, look alive, be part of the crowd.
That was probably his effort off looking alive. That was the best he could do.
Sad.
Maybe next time they could sort of ease him into it a little bit. Maybe take him up to North Point, because he was in Georgia, right? They could maybe take him to North Point Church in Alpharetta. Maybe ease him in just a little bit before they throw him in the deep end.
I can picture Bill Clinton or Donald Trump or Barack Obama eating the place up, dancing and whatever, tap dancing. But
the lobotomy affected it.
To be fair, I mean, Dan Worthington's favorite president, Trump, over there. I mean, you saw him dance to Macho Man. Can you imagine what he'd be like? He was in
something.
a black church.
Not to macho man. That's just wrong on so many levels and everything. But yeah, I thought we should open up with that one, but we did have some other things we wanted to get to in the news. But I also want to
Mark, just one last comment. It looks like Biden saw a ghost. I just got to leave that there.
I think Biden thinks he is the Holy Ghost.
That is quite possible that way. So, Alan, I know that I had we've had you a couple of times, and definitely want to hear what's going on in your world in the whole sense of some of the medical news that we might be hearing, and some of the things that are going on in the community, and some of the things that you are concerned about. So, I definitely want to bring that up, and then, of course, we'll get to some other world issues, and I definitely want to hear what folks' thoughts are about the U.S. being set to hit a debt ceiling, and apparently the Treasury is about to take some extraordinary measures, and I'm going to find out what those measures exactly are, because they did call them extraordinary. But Alan, just share a little bit once more with our listeners about some of the things that you're involved in the medical community.
Well, the nice thing is, of course, Mark, I'm newly retired. I'm going to celebrate my 75th birthday next month. So yes, not far away. Yesterday I spent the day answering questions for Mom Junction, which is a very active site in India. They got 20 million viewers a month. So I spent most of my time working on that. I did, however, read a little bit on Twitter about, this continuing problem with, and we talked about this last time, the Dobbs decision and what it means for obstetricians. And what it's going to boil down to, I think, there's an awful lot of people now, in the last several years, a lot of young doctors didn't want to go into obstetrics because of the lawsuit business. So they've already been suffering from a lack of applicants. But this is going to make things worse. There's going to be, one of the problems is that some of these obstetricians will get pregnant, and they want to have good obstetric care. They want to have access to everything they need to have. The other thing is setting up a residency program. What kind of program are you going to do in states where you don't have the slightest idea what the governor or the police force is going to do as far as enforcing Dobbs? And so everybody's afraid, and I think we're going to see a drop in the residency applicants. Also, we're going to see residency programs suffering, especially in the states where this thing is still up in the air.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Alan. Good morning. Can you just, for my benefit, maybe for others, explain what you mean? I don't understand what's going on. How did Dobbs affect obstetricians?
Well, the problem is that everybody's afraid of Dobbs, and
Why?
fear, of course, is not rational. So, and if you look at this from a pro-life obstetrician point of view, you would still be able to do therapeutic pregnancy terminations. You'd still be able to probably offer contraception, but the doctors are afraid that they won't be able to do any of those things. So it's going to have several ripple effects, but one of them will be trouble filling residency programs anywhere. And there's going to be an exodus from the states where obstetricians are not certain about what's going to happen to them or their patients.
I'm sorry. In the regular course of delivery, they'll be able to treat pregnant women and deliver healthy babies.
Yes.
What will they be allowed to do? Terminate abortions?
The problem is, and I'm trying to make this point, there's fear involved. And we know that most often fear isn't rational. So these doctors are afraid of how the state might view their management of a miscarriage, for example, or how the state might view their management of contraception. All of this is up in the air, and doctors are leaving. They're going to avoid states where the consequences will be unknown.
Alan, can I just ask you though, just
just
slightly
a little
pivoting
baby.
away from obstetrics. I understand and appreciate that not every abortion is being done. I think most mainstream people seem to have a problem with abortion being used as a contraceptive, essentially. But not every abortion is being done like that, especially late term abortions. It's often very, very heartbreaking for the families involved because there's some sort of problem and the abortion is unfortunately the only reasonable treatment for it. And I understand that there's going to be doctors that have some concerns. Look, this is an emergency situation. We need to get multiple approvals. We need to do this and that. But on the same token, something else that's very, very controversial is transing the kids. Is the idea that you're going to put them on puberty blocking medication. We're going to start essentially what we're going to do to these kids is sterilize them. They're never going to be able to have children of their own, that sort of stuff. That's a pretty serious type of thing to do. And yet the medical fraternity seems to be going full steam ahead with that. Why are we not seeing doctors saying, at some of the leading, hospitals and university hospitals saying, look, I'm not prepared to do this. We've actually had some of these hospitals say, if you're not prepared to deal with trans kids, get out. Are we seeing doctors that just go, look, I'm not doing it. I'm out of here?
Of course, I would say the majority of obstetricians would not even get into this trans kids business. I, for one, think it's kind of a disaster because at least some of these kids are going to regret their decisions. And we don't know how many of them will be doing that or what percentage. But what you're talking about is a niche, a very small group of people with a very small group of doctors willing to provide that service. So the other thing is, remember that the thing that the Supreme Court has done now is to politicize this. And so far, this transgender stuff has not been politicized. So there's not the emotion, there's not the fear, there's not the disgust.
Well,
I do think,
but there is.
Supreme Court has
actually
done nothing to politicize.
There is actually in the medical industry, right, where doctors are being told, and like say for example here in Australia, doctors are being told that you shouldn't ask the person what they prefer. You should just assume the lowest common denominator, essentially. So don't ask the woman if she's going to be breastfeeding. Ask the birthing person if they're going to be chest feeding. Now, contrary to what some people might have as an impression of me, I actually have met one or two women in my life, and I don't know any women that will actually say that they would prefer to be referred to as a birthing person. I don't know any women who have had children who say, oh, yes, I'm just chest feeding. But yet the doctors and the nurses are being told that they could be sued if they get that wrong, if they misgender a birthing person by referring to them as a mother. This is the sort of thing where I think politicians are interfering with the medical fraternity in a way that they really shouldn't be.
Well, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. As a matter of fact, it was kind of a shock to me, a birthing person. And I see that a lot. And yes, I'm sure that's politically correct, although I still think that I don't have any problem referring to a birthing mother or breastfeeding. I haven't heard of this chest feeding business, but then I haven't been delivering in the last year. So things are changing, I guess.
Hey, Dr. Lindemann, a couple of quick questions I had for you, and one of them was I've had the pleasure of having a couple of shows, some that have been on shows that I've done, some that have been on associates shows as well that are in the midwife field and the doula field. And I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and if that's something that you think is a good practice. You had actually just mentioned that you've been in calls with folks, I believe you said in India. So I do know that sometimes there are family kind of births as opposed to the hospital births. And I was just wondering your thoughts on that, both here in the West as well as other parts of the world. Because I'm imagining that's probably one of the common questions that you got even on those calls.
Well, I've always been a fan of midwives, and there's two groups of midwives. There's those who are certified and they behave pretty much like doctors. They're very aggressive. And then there's the group that's not certified, and they do mostly home births, but they do a really good job. I've never been afraid of them. I've never seen that they've done the wrong thing. I had a friend years ago who happened to give Methergin, that's a medicine to stop contractions, to a midwife so she could have it if she needed it. And in other words, a lay midwife. And he was punished by the medical board for doing that. So the official view of obstetricians and the medical boards is that we don't like home births. We don't like lay midwives. But the way I managed lay midwives was to invite them into the delivery room. So we were all there. The patients were happy. I was happy. The midwives were happy. And I think doulas are a great thing. And if you look at countries that do better with their more maternal mortality, like Norway, for example, they have a lot of midwives and they have a lot of home births. And I think it's important. The other thing we see here that's a real problem is you don't know who your doctor will be when you deliver. So if you have a midwife and deliver at home, you're more likely to have that same midwife. So I think doulas are great. I like midwives, especially the lay midwives. And I know I probably should have my tongue cut out for saying that, but I think they're just fine. And I think that that's one of the reasons we have lower maternal mortality rates in other countries.
No, that makes sense. And I know Shaquille's going to love this one because this comes to one of his favorite topics. But one of the things I'm hearing from the American Medical Associations and some of the other medical groups is that, and Shaquille will sometimes talk about what the baby boomers have done to the younger generations and all in that space. And apparently it's impacting the doctors because they're saying that because of the factors like older patients and retiring doctors, that there is going to be a shortfall of up to 139,000 physicians by 2033. So they're saying
that's a deliberate shortfall. That's not a shortfall because young people aren't smart enough to get to medical school. That's a shortfall that has been caused in the United States by the AMA giving universities hundreds of millions of dollars to reduce the amount of places for medical students. And that's a similar thing that you've seen in other countries, but it's not as pronounced. So this is just something that governments dropped the ball on. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever that if somebody can prove their competency and can prove that they know what they're doing with medicine, that they shouldn't be able to get a spot at a university and learn what they need to learn and practice as a doctor or practice in another medical field.
That's one of the big problems, Shaquille. You're right, as far as getting admitted to medical school. I know there's a lot fewer places in there, a lot fewer applicants. When I was applying to medical school, there were 350 applicants for 60 spots. And now they can just barely fill those spots. So there are people who are getting smart enough to not get into medicine because once you're in it, it's kind of a poison thing for some people. In other words, the EMR hasn't helped anything at all. It's just made things ugly. And if you look at
what's the EMR?
Electronic medical record. It was designed for billing and coding, and of course, it helps the federal government know things that they don't need to know and can't understand anyway, and make useless statistics out of it. In any event, you've got that. You also have a proliferation of administrators. If you look at the way administrators have grown in the last 20 years, it's 320, it's 3,200%. Whereas for doctors, it's 150%. So we really have an explosion of administrators. And you look at their salaries, you're talking about millions of dollars. And usually those administrators are paid bonuses to decrease doctors' salaries, which is a really dumb thing to do. I mean, if you want to get rid of a bunch of doctors, that's the fastest way to do it.
Sorry, Mark. I think one of the other issues, this is where Kimberly, for example, talks about changing the healthcare system in the United States, which I think does need an overhaul. Personally, looking at it from afar. Thankfully, the couple of times I've interacted with the healthcare system, it's been fantastic. But then again, I've paid for it with my credit card, then made a claim against my travel insurance. I haven't had to deal with the system like you guys would have to. But this is one of the issues that we saw in the UK, was that you had hospitals being built with no staff. You had 600 beds sitting empty because they couldn't get the medical staff, but they had 6 or 7 or 8 administrative staff for each medical practitioner. And I went to the doctors just recently to get some vaccinations because I'm going to Africa shortly. And he had to do about 45 minutes worth of paperwork and computer work on the records. He only saw me for about 20 minutes, but he had to do about 45 minutes worth of work. That slows down the process. And frankly, it's getting to a point where I think a lot of doctors are hardly even practicing medicine. They're just having to tick boxes on a computer screen. And that I think hurts patients. I think it hurts medical outcomes.
Yeah, and Dr. Lindeman, one of the other things I was curious about is kind of alluding to what Shaquille was talking about, is this notion of a lot of the doctors don't have there's a lot of new technology. During this pandemic, we saw a lot of telehealth where people were getting their medical care from afar and things of that nature. And I don't know that the doctors have been adequately trained in the telehealth. And I also think that there are a lot of corporate hospitals. So it's like there are a lot of corporate other kind of entities as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about both of those, both telehealth and this kind of rise in corporate hospitals.
Well, let's take the second one first. The rise in corporate hospitals really is deleterious for both patients and for providers, and that's nurse practitioners, PAs. Right now, if you look at who's doing what as far as who buying, you've got about 48% of the hospitals owned by large Catholic institutions, and that really. You have to understand that a Catholic hospital is Catholic first and healthcare second. So there's a lot of things you can't do in a Catholic healthcare system. And we have one in particular close to us in Bismarck. They bought the hospital and almost ruined it. And along with almost ruining the hospital, they almost ruined the clinic that was associated with it. And they did that partly by shipping off a lot of money to the mother house and keep making the hospital suffer. Now, if you go to that hospital, you'll find parking lots empty, you'll find beds empty, but they can't take patients because they don't have employees. And we have definitely a so-called nursing shortage, which is manufactured. My wife and I wrote a book back in '92. We talked about the fake nursing shortage, which we still have. It's still fake. The name of the book is Modern Medicine, What You're Dying to Know. We should have called it Why Your Healthcare Costs Too Much, but we thought the title was cute. Anyway, you've got that problem. And then and the other thing that the public doesn't know is every time one institution, say the CHI, they bought the hospital in Bismarck, one of them anyway, who pays for that? The answer is the public pays for it in the increased insurance premiums. So we really need to put an end to acquisitions because there's an awful lot of money wasted in acquisitions. So back to your first question, and I'm not totally demented. I remember your first question was about telehealth.
Right.
Now we have, my wife and I have a website, so we have that presence, and we're also doing a book, another one. I like to call it Safe and Happy Pregnancy and Postpartum, but we're arguing about the title. So we'll probably wind up beta testing it and getting 100 opinions, hopefully. Anyway, we're doing that. But yes, we've had no training in telehealth at our institution. So we need to know the legal process. The other thing about telehealth is it's really not quite as good as actually seeing the patient. And I know it's supposed to be. I know I'm barking up a bad tree here. I mean, I'm supposed to say I love telehealth and oh yeah, rah rah rah. Except I don't really like telehealth. I like being in the same room with my patient.
Alan, I just want to say a couple of things there. You made a comment about acquisitions. Now, obviously, being a free market kind of guy, I don't actually see that in and of itself being a problem. In fact, I think if private capital thinks that it can compete, then it should do so, and it's really the government's fault for interfering in what would otherwise be a free market. And if I can expand on that, you've talked about a hospital. I'm not familiar with the hospital that you're referring to, but why couldn't I, an entrepreneurial person, get a whole heap of people together and say, look, guys, throw some money in the kitty. We're going to build a hospital just down the road. I'm going to hazard a guess that I probably wouldn't be able to do that because of government regulations. And so when government, restricts the amount of healthcare available, that's what drives up the prices. Not, in my opinion, the corporations come in and buy a hospital because they think they can turn a profit.
Well, they do turn a profit, and that's the problem, because every single time something is bought, it raises the cost of medical care.
That's right. But if you have more competition, that would lower the price of medical care. We're not nearly there yet. That would take a long time, and I don't think that's a good answer for the problem of cost. My wife is telling me here we should have doctor-owned hospitals. They were eliminated in 1995 in this country, but I think it would be a really good idea. But again, that's the same thing. If you think there should be doctor-owned hospitals and they've been eliminated, who eliminated them? Government regulation, right?
Absolutely.
Let's compare US healthcare not to Canada or Australia or countries that have universal or single payer. Let's compare American healthcare to a country that has got private health insurance as being their predominant way of delivering health, Switzerland. Now, Switzerland has private health insurance. The way it works over there is if you can't afford private health, the government will give it to you. Okay, but you will always have private healthcare. So you've got the choice of different places. You've got private hospitals that you can go and see. You can also go to other private hospitals in other European Union countries, notably Germany, if you're having a knee replacement, that sort of thing. There's no reason that I can see why the United States would not be better off by adopting that model. And there's no reason I can see as to why the United States can't adopt that model, other than the fact that the politicians don't want them to, because the politicians have been lobbied by a group of people who are profiting from the inefficiencies that currently exist.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of money here, and one of the biggest sources of money is Big Pharma. As a matter of fact, Big Pharma was, like I said, the main reason that the doctors can't own hospitals in 1995. But I think it's stupid to have doctors not own hospitals. It's like saying a lawyer can't own a law practice or a banker can't own a bank. It's just a dumb idea.
I'm sorry, doctor. What's the logic behind not having doctors own hospitals?
I think that still doctors are the number one defender of patients. I think that of all the people we're talking about, the insurance companies, the administrators, the federal government, doctors and other healthcare providers are the only people involved who have a fiduciary responsibility. That is, we must take the best interest of the patient to heart, and we must always serve their best interests. If you look at, for example, the people that are kind of control doctors like Big Pharma and the federal government, they don't have that. All they have to do is make a decision based on whether they're going to make money or not make money. But doctors are the ones who have to care about whether that patient does well or not.
No, I understand that. I appreciate that. So what's the downside of them? What's the other side's argument to restrict doctors from doing that?
Well, I think it's petty, but they talk about, you're going to have doctors, if they own the hospital, they're going to get rich and they're going to charge too much for the services and they're going to charge too much for the beds. Well, the services are already being charged too much. And that has a lot to do with the AMA and the federal government deciding what they will pay. For example, they fight to the death to make, if I put in a charge for $60, they fight to the death to whittle it down to $35. On the other hand, you got somebody who needs a hip replaced, that's an automatic $80,000 a procedure. And any orthopedist could probably do 4 of those a day. So you're talking about making $300,000 a day in hip surgeries. And the government and insurances don't object to that. And a lot of that has to do with the way the lobbying is done, the relationship with the AMA. But it would be a really simple thing to do to say, we're not going to pay $80,000 for a hip. We're going to pay $40,000 for a hip, and you're going to like it.
Can I just clarify something that you've said there, Alan? So I get together with all my investors and I say, we're going to go and own a hospital. We're going to get rich. And that's absolutely okay. But if you get together with all of your colleagues and say, we're going to own a hospital, deliver better healthcare and get rich, that's not okay. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly right. That's the law in this country as of 1995.
Same with nursing homes.
I am not aware of any physician-owned nursing home. Most of them are not for profit. We do have one for profit in the state of North Dakota, but doctors don't own them that I know of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We wanted to get to a couple of world issues and everything, and one of them actually alludes to something y'all were talking about in the sense of government and how government handles issues, including agent issues and all of that. And I really wish Chris was here, because Chris is our person that is not the biggest fan of France and everything, but apparently the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has decided he wants to do some pension reform. So he's going to raise the retirement age. And
well done, Macron. President Macron, well done. You are so intelligent. You have the lowest level of satisfaction in the European Union. Only 4% of French people believe that their children and grandchildren will live a life that is at least as good as the one that they've lived. Grandparents, people that lived through World War II, dude, what is wrong with you?
And
anyway,
that's why there are mass protests in France.
I do want to say, so in Ardern's resignation, which for some bizarre reason that is completely unfathomable to me, the rest of the world thinks that she's the darling of Australia and New Zealand. Well, she's not, and it's so interesting to see the cards that she tries to play. In her speech today, she said that she didn't have enough left in the tank to continue. She didn't think that she could, that she was the best person to lead anymore. And then one of the Anne-Marie Brady, who was a professor of politics at the University of Canterbury, New Zealand, said that I think any young woman that has grown up in this era where we can have it all, yes, but actually we still have our heart connections to our loved ones. Women have been liberated, but patriarchal institutions have not evolved enough to support family life. We need people like Jacinda Ardern in politics, so her situation is cause for reflection about what we can do to more support women in politics and their family life too. Now, I'm sorry. I work a lot of hours when I'm trading, okay? That makes it difficult to juggle a family life. What do you want? This is the way the world works. And the idea that there is somehow some patriarchal conspiracy against Jacinda Ardern when she was elected as one of the youngest female political leaders in the world, she was, treated with such gusto around the world, it's a farcical comment. And I might remind the rest of the world that if you look at her and just go, well, she's a young woman, yay for women, yay for feminism, maybe you should see what's actually happening in New Zealand and how New Zealanders feel about it. And with New Zealand, who's the first country in the Western world to give women the vote, they're the first country to make abortion legal, etc. Okay, they've been the forefront of women's rights. To suggest that there's some sort of patriarchal conspiracy is nonsense. The reason that she's polling so badly, she said that she was going to build 100,000 affordable homes. She hasn't done it. She's built 1,300. She said that she was going to lock the borders because of COVID. She locked down the borders so hard that even New Zealand citizens couldn't return to their own country. They were stuck abroad, many of whom had to come to Australia because they get automatic rights in Australia as a New Zealand citizen. People like myself who have family members in New Zealand couldn't go and visit them for 2 years. She's also said she wants to cool the housing market. Well, that's a good way of saying she wants the housing market prices to drop, which means that the everyday New Zealander is going to see their net worth drop at a time that you're in a pandemic, at a time when interest rates are rising in New Zealand, at the time when inflation is really high. When I was in New Zealand last year, it was $3.20 a litre for petrol to put in your car. Okay, so that equates in American terms to about $12 a gallon. Okay, we're talking about paying $30 for a carton of eggs in New Zealand. Oof. You're talking about cheese and butter being $10 for a little thing of butter. And that she thinks that none of that has had anything to do with why the Labor Party may not win the next election. The only reason that this is down to is because she had a child, had maternity leave, and that the world of politics is too patriarchal. Give me a break. Come on now.
No, is there anything that you like about this woman that she did anything right? Because I'm going like there was a whole litany of things that she did wrong, and I don't know.
I'll tell you why I don't like her politics. Her as a person I like. I don't like her politics. when she was the opposition leader against John Key and Bill English, there was something that happened in Australia that had nothing to do with New Zealand at all. It had absolutely nothing to do. The Australian Liberal Party, which is her opposite essentially, the Conservative Party of Australia, so the equivalent of the Nationals for New Zealand, had a policy that she didn't agree with, and she decided to spend her time in New Zealand Parliament actually attacking not Australia's policy, but attacking the political party of that country. Now, because I'm not in politics, I will make comments both positive and negative about other countries' politicians, okay, especially on this show, because that's why we're here, right? And I've never been known to be shy. If I was, in fact, in politics, though, if I was the Prime Minister or an opposition leader for Australia, I wouldn't make the comments about Trudeau that I do. I wouldn't make the comments about Trump and Biden that I do. I wouldn't do that. So why does she think that it's reasonable? It's my question back then. Why did she think that it was a reasonable use of taxpayer dollars to spend time on the floor ripping into an Australian political party? That's got nothing to do with New Zealand. So that's why I didn't like her. And I think that she's done an appalling job sucking up to Justin Trudeau and trying to bring this brand of wokeness that New Zealanders don't like. And as a result, by the way, New Zealand, for the first time since I don't know when, has had a negative migration level. They've lost people. They've got young New Zealanders that are leaving New Zealand in droves, predominantly coming to Australia for opportunities because they don't feel like they've got them there. Okay? Is that a good thing? The Five Eyes countries in Western Europe are the most desirable places. That's where all the immigrants want to go. New Zealand had negative net migration over the last couple of years, and it hasn't improved. The rate of crime has gone up significantly. The rate of self-harm and suicide amongst the youth in New Zealand has gone up significantly. What is good about her management of New Zealand? Nothing. New Zealanders don't like her for it.
Yeah, Shaquille, speaking of that, I'm going to bring up and I mentioned her yesterday, a young lady that is definitely part of the environmental movement and all in that way and everything. And it definitely is in her, I guess, 20s now, or maybe she's even a little bit older than that. But she went after one of your favorite groups, which is definitely those folks on the corporate side and all of that. So we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to hear what Greta's got to say about rich folks.
I'll just say one last thing about Jacinda. Just talking about climate change. Okay. Yeah. Now, we all need to do something. All right. But you've got an agricultural country. After all of the other things that she has inflicted upon the citizens of New Zealand, she then decides to put on an agricultural country a tax on the cows and the sheep that New Zealand has. Is there anything that she has done for New Zealanders that has been good? No. What she has done is she's used her 5.5 years in her mid to late 30s when she became elected, okay, on a minority government ticket, by the way. She's used that time to go sucking up to all of the left-wing political parties around the world to make her look good. And I'll tell you what she's going to do. She's going to do the same thing as Australia's first female prime minister. She's going to run across to the United Nations. She's going to join up with Hillary Clinton and Prime Minister Gillard and talk about women's rights, because that's what it is. There's never, ever any self-responsibility taken. Okay, the problem with the policies that she has, that's not the problem. It was sexism. Now that it's not working so well for her, it must be sexism. She's going to play the sex card or the gender card. It's pathetic. So let's see some wisdom from Greta.
Yeah, let's hear what Greta's got to say about climate and rich folks. So let's check out what Greta's got to say.
I'm just going to ask you what your message is for the World Economic Forum here today. And it's very nice to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for, so we are right now in Davos, where basically the people who are mostly fueling the destruction of the planet, the people who are at the very core of the climate crisis, the people who are investing in fossil fuels, etc., and yet somehow these are the people that we seem to rely on solving our problems, where they have proven time and time again that they are not prioritizing that. They are prioritizing self-greed, corporate greed, and short-term economic profits above people and above planet. And we seem to be listening to them rather than the people who are actually affected by the climate crisis, the people who are living on the front lines, and that kind of tells us the situation, how absurd this is. So but the people who we really should be listening to are not here. Instead, we are bombarded with messages from people who are basically the people who are causing this crisis.
I'm sorry, what did she say?
It's not worth listening to, Lee. It's really not. But you know what? I'll tell you, Mark. Some of what she says is correct, and I will actually back her up on. Okay, there are corporations that will put people behind profit, put profits before people. That is true. I don't question that. And there are also corporations that don't care about the environmental damage that they do, that do a cost-benefit analysis and work out, well, if we do this thing, how much will it cost us? Okay, that's true. But she's not offering any solutions either. She seems to think that, and like little comments that she makes, well, we're listening to them instead of listening to the people that are most affected by climate change. What sort of bullshit's that? What does that mean? Let's say it was healthcare. Do I say, well, you know, Alan's a doctor, okay, and heaven forbid, I've got some horrible disease, say I've got cancer. Well, I'm not going to listen to Alan because he doesn't have cancer, so he's not affected by it.
Shaquille, it sounds nice. It sounds like she cares.
It sounds like
isn't that worth something?
But what she's doing, and by the way, who the hell made the World Economic Forum in charge of everything? I don't recall having a vote on that. I mean, who are these people? But she wants to go around criticizing all these different things, but she doesn't want to offer any solutions. And the reason why is because deep down she knows. She's been around for a while now. She's been doing this since she was 14, 15 years old.
Excuse me.
She knows that the solutions don't exist the way that she wants.
Shaquille, may I ask you a question? Do you have any idea what is she worth financially?
Last time I checked, it was under 10 million, but it's worth a bit. She's worth a bit. You know, but like most hustlers, race hustlers at BLM who have gone and bought multi-million-dollar mansions, right? The feminist hustlers that go and write books and do all these different things. You know, we had I forget her name now, but she went to the United Nations to complain about people on the internet saying you suck. You know, meanwhile you've got girls
this is the name of the game, that mediocre people, once they find the right issue, whether it's a climate change or some women's issues or some gender's issues, or just it doesn't really matter. They can pick up any popular issues and start pumping on it and going on the tours and writing maybe a book or something and make money. That's the name of the game. Don't you understand that? Why would you allow her to speak even for 40 seconds? Because all that makes her even more money. That's all there is to it.
Well, Sasha, I'm not the one that played the tape. I wouldn't let her speak at a bloody birthday party, let alone in front of an international forum.
Mark,
right?
may I ask you a question?
And Sasha, I just want to say something real quick. And Mark, of all the news sources, The Guardian. This is the kind of organization that when that great intelligent scientist called Pink, Alicia, whatever her name is,
right,
decided to come to Australia and tell Australian farmers not to mills the sheep, only to be told, do you know how cruel it would be if we didn't do that? This is the same Guardian that a couple of days ago criticised the New South Wales government for not banning the artificial insemination of greyhounds. Well, would you like us to have all the greyhounds get infections? Because that's how animal husbandry works. This is the best way to do it, the cleanest way to do it. But these people don't care. Because they get an issue, they push the button, and off they go with it. Sasha, back to you.
No, I'm a little bit frustrated that we had her 40 seconds or a minute tape. Now we are going to discuss everything what she said for another 10 minutes. So she's making money. The Guardian is making money. Mark, are you making any money out of it? Because if not, what do you need it for?
Like I said, it was just a clip to actually bring a issue to the topic that we were talking about on that particular thing. So, like I said, that's why I chose to play it at that particular time, was just to give some merit to the conversation. But we're going to move on to another conversation because I did have a couple other things I was going to get to, including the Ukraine and Russia and all in that space.
When you weren't here, I'll say this very quickly, and then we'll give the floor to Sasha to talk about the Ukraine. But When you weren't here, we had one of our highest rating shows. I just thought I'd just drop that in there for.
You do an amazing job. I told you, you're the Walter Cronkite.
We had a conversation about renewable energy, and it got to a point where I actually asked everybody on the panel. I said, "Is there anyone here that disagrees with what I've said?" And everyone's like, "No, that makes perfect sense." Now, Dan and I have some disagreement. We're probably mostly agree. We have a little bit of disagreement between whether we should use hydrogen power or other sources. But the main objective is we're heading in the same direction. We have the same sorts of ideas. And I think that if people on the political left can get off their high bloody horses and have a conversation, they're always saying, "Oh, look, I put some tomato sauce on a painting because I wanted to have a conversation." Well, come and actually have a conversation with us. Because what you'll actually find is that most people on the planet, most corporations are actually on your side. You're not on your side, but we are.
Well, it was actually interesting, just to let y'all know, I actually had a guest on the online dinner party yesterday that was from Suriname, which is a Latin American country. And in our conversations afterwards, she did say that she might want to come back on because you were talking about some of the tourism aspects of what Suriname is about. We got into a little bit of politics and everything, but she said if I wanted her to go in deeper, she would love to have that conversation. So we might bring her back on, Leah, and I'm trying to remember Leah's last name, to talk about Suriname and some of what's going on there, because she was afraid that we did not give those kind of voices. But I told her, hey, on Pod TV, we love to hear all kinds of different voices and not all the voices that we agree with. So she may come back on at some point as well.
We prefer to have voices that we don't agree with so that we can discuss the topics and exchange ideas.
Exactly.
Mark, if we're going to Russia and Ukraine now, can I ask Sasha a question? Sasha, I put in the comments a quote that was out in the news today about Russia and them being a nuclear power and a nuclear power never losing a war. Do you want to comment on that?
I'll tell you one thing, that the nuclear power country has never fought the war, except that it happened by United States at the end of the Second World War. And it just happened to have the bomb ready by August 1945. And the first test of that bomb was just a month or so before that. So the Second World War could end without U.S. Actually exercising its new weapon. Now, speaking from that, I think the nuclear weapons, actually, they contributed greatly to a world peace until recently Russia decided to challenge that. Can you imagine that from 1945, when the first nuclear weapon was used, until recently, and say 2021, there was no major war, never nuclear weapons were used or about to be used, frankly. So there is very positive development of U.S. first using the nuclear weapons, demonstrating their destructive power. And from now on, there was no use, except one thing. Now Russia is actually, I've read one very interesting political paper, actually composed by highly placed Russian commentators, very close to Kremlin. And one of issue, what they discuss is that Russia actually made a devaluation of nuclear weapons. And the doctrine is exactly what you just said, that how nuclear powered country, which has nuclear weapons, can lose the war to country which has none. Actually, that war should never have been fought, on understanding that just the ability to use nuclear weapons, especially in the numbers that Russia possesses, should eliminate any possible war. What they could have done is to say to Ukraine, and countries which are backing Ukraine, starting from the United States and UK and France and whoever they are, saying, okay, guys, look, here is what we need. We need this and this and such. We'll give you 2 weeks to implement that. And once you do all that, we are all happy campers. If you are failing to do all of that, not just any of that, but all of that, then we will unleash nuclear weapons on your countries, capitals, everything, or so on. This is okay. It's obviously it's a terrorist's approach. It's if it's not going to be followed up by mutual destruction of everything, then it's a bluff, the purest one. But at least you don't fight the needless war. All you make, you put. It's just like a poker game. You say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm all in. Now,
Hey, Sasha.
accept it or run away. So
Hey,
Russia
Sasha, speak-
made a joke out of their nuclear arsenal. In the
I
Yeah,
think Dan
Sasha,
wanted to
speak-
say something, Mark. Dan had his
Yeah.
hand up before.
No, Dan.
What?
Dan, you wanted to say something before you had your hand up?
No, I just I think the interesting thing that it was called mutually assured destruction. You know,
Yep.
MAD. That was the theory behind the nuclear deterrent. I think that idea still exists. The problem is that you've got an embarrassed and frankly weakened Putin and a weakened Russia, and they find themselves in Ukraine in a situation similar to Afghanistan because they really can't win. I mean, they could flatten the whole country and destroy it, make it non-existent, but and to do that, they'd probably pay the price of being destroyed themselves. It's insane. The strategy that they're following, they thought they'd be able to go in, take the areas that they wanted to take, and then kind of say happy days, and no one would object. Of course, we know that people, when their freedom is challenged, when their homes are challenged, their families are challenged by a foreign aggressor, they're going to fight with their lives. The Russian soldiers don't have the same motivation because they're forced into military service without any real objective in mind other than what their generals tell them to do, which is go and die if you really want to. I think it's a sad commentary on modern warfare and how we wage it. Like Sasha pointed out before, and I think our military expert pointed out before, Chris, all you really have to do is go to Google Earth, set in the coordinates, send a bomb the hell out of it. And that's what we're going to end up doing, like a ping pong match for the next 6 to 8 months, ultimately before anybody decides they want to come up with a solution.
Dan, I would like to add something to what you just said about mutual assured destruction. Indeed, that concept was the prevalent for I would say 60, 70 years or so. However, lately, I've noticed in Russian publications, they now deny the concept of mutual assured destruction. What they're saying is that it was based on wrong calculations, that now the buildings are more that they're able to withstand the wave, the destructive wave better. And there are some new, I don't know, maybe Dr. Lindman will correct me, but they're saying is that now they discovered a new medicine that can much better treat the radiation effects. So even that is not so horrible as it perceived before. So therefore, they're now coming to numbers. What they're saying is that in a case of nuclear exchange between Russia and, for example, United States, it's not going to be hundreds of millions and billion people dead or so on. It's going to be only 55 million people will lose their lives. Maybe the same number will be sick. Some of them will die, but people are dying anyway, so it's not a big deal. So some people will die sooner that they would do otherwise. So the effect of mutual assured destruction is definitely over-exaggerated. It's not true. And even if we are wrong and it's not 55 million people will die, but say twice the numbers, 110 million people will die, even that's not such a big deal in case that we will finally get the final victory, and the world will be ours for centuries to come, and so on. So this is very dangerous, in my opinion, thinking, downplaying the effects of real nuclear exchange. I don't understand what's the purpose of it, to tell their own people that, because it was published in Russian publication. I'm not sure it's been translated to or published anywhere in English press. So they want to assure their own people that, yeah, some of you will die, but those who will remain, let's say your children, for example, and grandchildren, they will live in a wonderful world. Russia will be the number one, or so on. Now, we're coming to this. This is really a laughing stock, simply because when Putin, if you remember, came to power, his economic program was to catch on with Portugal, which was at that time the poorest, most undeveloped country in Europe. So Putin at that time, let's give him some credit, he was much more realistic than many other people who perceived Russia being the great power and so on and so on. Putin at that time, we are talking about a year 2000, maybe 2001, when he just came to power. So his thinking was very realistic. It was modest. And I'll tell you that the big change came when this prices for oil and gas started rising. And he came up in Munich in 2007 with extremely hostile approach to the West, and accusing them of all kinds of crimes, possible and impossible. And from that point on, it's becoming slowly a different Putin. And we know what's happened in 2008, invasion of Georgia, 2014, invasion of Crimea and annexation of Crimea, and then Syria, then just name it, the killing, the political opposition, starting from Mr. Litvinenko in London, poisoned by what's the material? I forgot. Not plutonium, but polonium, and horrible death in a matter of 2, maybe 3 weeks. And now we have what we have. However, Russia is a result of this conflict, regardless when and how it will end. Russia is becoming much, much weaker country. That Russia was a menace for the last 3 generations, threatening to destroy all the world, their nuclear attacks or so on. Most of the times they were bluffing. It's like similar like Cuban crisis, if you remember. The Mr. Khrushchev was threatening that Russia has 1,000 warheads, nuclear warheads. Apparently they had only 2. And so basically it was a bluff, but it worked. Kennedy had to do some concessions and so on, take out military bases in Turkey and so on. So right now, without putting any man on the ground, whether it's US people or Western people, right now it's a time when, thanks to heroic Ukrainian forces, the West can get rid of Russian threat one and for all. And that's, I hope, will happen.
Sasha, just quickly, you've walked me into something. I said that her net worth was under 10 million, and I'm getting all sorts of messages from people. Apparently, she's such a good person. She won $1 million prize. She gave it all to charity through a foundation that she controls, and her net worth's $100,000. But thank you for the commentary on Russia and the Ukraine. I think that some of Putin's comments towards the West at Munich were founded. The West have done some things wrong, but there's no excuse for what's going on right now, in my opinion.
No excuse right at all. And get ready to wind down and everything. There were a couple of news stories that I was getting ready to get to, and maybe we'll get to them either tomorrow or next week, including the decline in population in China. coming about climate change. Apparently, Greenland's temperature is the hottest in 1,000 years. Why they're even bothering to put that out there, that'll be an interesting thing to say. And there's been all kinds of talk in the trade of arms, because I know Russia is saying that they want their Armada tanks in the Ukraine and their Brimstone missiles that are being sent from the UK to the Ukraine. There's some other missiles that are being sent and different other kinds of weapons. And apparently Germany is saying that they will send tanks to the Ukraine if the U.S. will do the same thing, and all in that space. And then the last thing is actually going to be addressed to Lee, because I mentioned that I had a guest on yesterday that was from Suriname. And what I did not realize is that Suriname was part of a deal with the Dutch, and that's how we actually had the whole New York part of the United States, because apparently Suriname was part of that trade. So we would not have New York if it wasn't for Suriname, is what I learned yesterday.
Thank you for sharing.
No problem. And on that note, we get ready to get on out of here, and we will definitely be here on tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We've got some other shows coming up on the network on this particular evening, and we hope that folks will stay tuned at podtv.tv and catch the various programs that exist and all the great commentary, including Barbara Smith, will be coming up at noon. But right now, let's get ready to get on out of here.